The coffee was still hot when my daughter-in-law looked across the Thanksgiving table and said it. With everything going on, maybe it's time you thought about letting someone else handle the finances? No offense, but you're not exactly in your prime anymore. She said it lightly, like a joke almost, like it was nothing, like I wasn't sitting right there. I set down my mug, I looked at her, and I smiled. That's interesting, I said. Considering my name is still on every single account, her smile didn't waver. But something behind her eyes did. That was the moment I knew. I'd suspected for months. But that comment, so casual, so calculated, that was the confirmation I needed. Let me back up. My name is Audrey. I'm 63 years old, and for 31 years, I worked as a forensic accountant, mostly for federal agencies and large private firms. I retired early, not because I had to, but because my husband Leonard passed away 2 years ago, and I needed time to breathe, to grieve, to figure out what the second half of my life was supposed to look like without the man I'd built it with. Leonard and I had one son. His name is Philip. He's 34, kind-hearted in a way that sometimes borders on naive, and he has his father's eyes. After Leonard died, Philip and I grew closer than we've been in years. He called every Sunday. He drove up from Richmond twice a month. For a while, it felt like we were holding each other up. Then he met Nora. I want to be fair here, because I've thought about this a lot. Nora is not an unintelligent woman. She's sharp, actually, sharp in the way that a person is when they've spent a long time figuring out how to get what they want. She grew up in a difficult situation, from what Philip told me. Moved around a lot. Put herself through community college. Has a real estate license she barely uses. I don't say any of this to be cruel. I say it because context matters, and because I spent 3 decades watching people make financial decisions under pressure. Some of them honest, some of them not, and I know what desperation looks like when it puts on a nice dress. Philip met Nora at a friend's birthday party in late 2022. By March of 2023, she'd moved into his apartment. By August, they were engaged. By the following spring, they were married in a small ceremony in the Blue Ridge Mountains that I helped pay for, because Philip asked me to, and I love my son. I liked Nora in the beginning, or I tried to. She was charming when she wanted to be. She brought flowers the first time she came to my house in Charlottesville. She asked about Leonard's photographs on the mantel and listened when I talked about him. I remember thinking, maybe I'm one of those lucky mothers. Maybe this is going to be fine. The first sign I ignored was about the house. Philip had been renting an apartment in Richmond for years, but after the wedding, he started talking about buying something. He called me one Sunday and mentioned that Nora had found a place, a 3-bedroom craftsman in a good neighborhood, good school district, the whole thing. He was excited. I asked about the financing, the way I always do, because that's just how my brain works. We're still figuring out the mortgage, he said. Nora's handling most of it. She said it's better if we go through her contact, someone she knows in lending. I asked who the contact was. He didn't know the name offhand. I asked if he'd seen the loan documents. He said Nora was managing the paperwork. I let it go. He was a grown man. It wasn't my place to insert myself. 3 months later, they moved into the house. I visited in October, brought a casserole and a check for the housewarming the way you do. The house was beautiful. Nora had decorated it like something out of a catalog. I remember standing in the kitchen and feeling a very specific unease that I couldn't name yet. Philip walked me to my car when I left. He looked tired. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just a lot of adjustments." I hugged him and drove home and told myself I was being paranoid. The second sign I also ignored was about the money. After Leonard passed, I inherited a modest but meaningful sum. Our savings, his life insurance, the investments we'd built together over decades of careful, boring financial planning. Nothing extravagant, but enough that I would be comfortable for the rest of my life, as long as I was sensible. I had a financial advisor I'd worked with for years, a woman named Frances at a firm in Charlottesville, and everything was in order. About 6 months after the wedding, Nora started asking questions. Just conversation at first. What do you think about annuities? I've been reading about them. Have you ever considered moving some of your assets into a trust? It's so much easier for inheritance that way. You know, there are advisors who specialize in estate planning for women in your situation, widows, I mean. I could put you in touch. Every time I answered vaguely and changed the subject. Every time she moved on gracefully, but she kept coming back to it. The third sign I could not ignore. It was February. I'd driven down to Richmond for Philip's birthday, a small dinner at their house, just the three of us, because that's what he wanted. Nora had made his favorite meal, and the table was set beautifully, and for the first part of the evening, everything felt almost normal. Then, somewhere between the main course and dessert, Philip mentioned that he'd taken on some extra freelance work. He does software consulting, and he's good at it, but the extra hours had been grinding him down. He said he was doing it because they needed to cover some unexpected costs. What kind of costs? I asked. He glanced at Nora. Just some things with the house, she said smoothly. Repairs. You know how it is with older properties. What kind of repairs? I asked. I couldn't help it. Nora looked at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Nothing to worry about, Audrey. We have it handled. And then she said it. The thing I've turned over in my mind probably 1,000 times since. Actually, she said, lifting her wine glass, I've been thinking it might be helpful if you gave Philip access to your main accounts. Just co-signatory, so that if anything ever happens to you, there's no delay. It's really the responsible thing to do at your age. At your age. I was 62. Philip looked uncomfortable. I could see it. He hadn't known she was going to say that. He opened his mouth like he was about to apologize or redirect, and Nora touched his hand lightly and he went quiet. I set down my fork. I looked at her, and I said, very calmly, I'll think about it. I drove home that night with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind already working. Here's what you need to understand about 31 years in forensic accounting. You don't need someone to confess. You don't need a smoking gun. You need patterns. You need access to records. And you need patience. I had all three. I started carefully. The first thing I did was call Frances and tell her that under no circumstances was anyone other than me authorized to make changes to my accounts. Not to add cosigners, not to shift assets, nothing. I asked her to flag any unusual inquiries. She asked if everything was all right. I said I wasn't sure yet. Then I started paying attention. I went back through the conversations I'd had with Nora over the past year and wrote them all down. Dates, approximate times, what was said, what was implied. It's something I used to do professionally, reconstructing financial timelines from memory and records together. I was surprised how much came back once I sat down and focused. I called Philip's old college roommate, a young man named Derek, who I've known since Philip was 20 and who has always been straightforward with me. I asked him, gently, how Philip seemed to him lately. He paused for a long time before he answered. Honestly, Mrs. Audrey, he seems stressed. Like, more than work stress. He mentioned something once about money being tighter than expected, and I don't know, she kind of talks over him sometimes, you know? I didn't want to say anything. I know, I said. Thank you, Derek. Then I started looking into Nora herself. What I found wasn't dramatic. It was just a trail, the kind that someone leaves when they're not quite careful enough because they don't think anyone is looking. Her real estate license had been inactive for over a year, which meant the income she'd described to Philip came from somewhere else or nowhere. There was a civil judgment against her from 6 years ago in another county, a dispute with a former business partner that she'd lost. Small amount, but it told me something about her history. And then I found the name of the lender she'd used for Philip's mortgage. It was a private lending company, not a bank, not a credit union, a private firm. And when I looked into that firm, I found that one of its principals shared a last name with Nora's mother. I'm not going to say I knew exactly what I was looking at right then, but I knew enough to keep going. I hired a private attorney, not someone local, someone in Richmond, someone Nora would have no reason to know about. I laid out everything I'd gathered and asked for a professional assessment. She spent 2 weeks reviewing it and came back to me with a summary that made me sit down very slowly in my kitchen chair. The short version, the mortgage on Philip and Nora's house, had terms that were significantly worse than what Philip could have qualified for through a conventional lender. The rate, the fees, the structure, all of it added up to tens of thousands of dollars in unnecessary cost over the life of the loan, and the private firm had, on paper, received a referral fee from the transaction, a fee that went to an LLC. An LLC whose registered agent was, if you traced it carefully enough, connected to Nora. She hadn't stolen from me. Not yet. But she had positioned herself, through the mortgage, through the conversations about my accounts, through Philip's exhaustion and his trust in her, to do exactly that when the opportunity arrived. The opportunity she had been most clearly angling for was my estate. I'm going to be honest with you. The hardest part of all of this wasn't the paperwork. It wasn't even the attorney fees. The hardest part was Philip, because I had to tell him. I couldn't build a legal case around his life, around his marriage, around decisions he'd made in good faith, without telling him what I'd found. And I didn't know what he was going to do when I did. I asked him to meet me for lunch, just the two of us. A diner halfway between Charlottesville and Richmond that we used to go to when he was in high school, before a Saturday soccer game or a college visit. He knew something was wrong the moment I called and said, "Just you." He was already at the table when I arrived. He had a cup of coffee and he looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. I sat down. I ordered. I waited until the waitress had gone. Then I pushed a folder across the table. "I need you to look at this," I said. "Take your time. I'll answer whatever questions you have." He looked at me for a long moment before he opened it. He was quiet for a very long time. I watched him read. I watched his expression shift. Confusion first, then a particular kind of stillness that looked to me like the stillness before something breaks. "Mom," he finally said, "this is her family's company? It appears that way. She told me it was just, she told me it was a better rate. She said she'd done the research." "I know. She never mentioned. I didn't know she had any connection to." "I know, sweetheart." He closed the folder. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at the wall and breathed. "What do I do?" he asked. And I said something that I had been thinking about for weeks, trying to find the right words for. "That's your choice," I said. "I'm not here to make it for you. I'm here because you're my son and you deserve to know what I found. Whatever you decide, I'm on your side." He looked at me. His eyes were wet. He nodded once. "I need to talk to her," he said. "I know. I need to hear what she says." "That's fair." He took the folder. He paid for the coffee. He hugged me in the parking lot for a long time, the way he used to when he was small, and I held on and didn't say anything because there was nothing left to say. That was a Thursday. On Saturday, he called me at 7 in the morning. "She admitted it," he said. His voice was very quiet. "Not everything, but enough. She said she hadn't thought of it as, she said she was just trying to help her family's business. She said she didn't think it was a big deal." "What did you say?" Long pause. "I said it was a very big deal." He said, "I said she lied to me multiple times about our house, about money, about things I had a right to know." I didn't say anything. "I asked her about your accounts," he said. "The co-signer thing. Why she brought that up." Another pause. "She said she was just being practical." I let that sit for a moment. "Philip," I said, "what do you need from me right now?" "Nothing," he said. "I think I just needed you to know that I believe you, and that I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." There's a particular kind of grief in that moment, When your child apologizes for something that isn't really their fault, for being deceived by someone they loved, for trusting when trust was the natural and human thing to do. I didn't cry while we were on the phone. I cried after. The legal process took several months. My attorney sent a formal demand letter to the lending firm outlining what we'd found and giving them the opportunity to address the discrepancy in the mortgage terms. They countered with their own attorneys. There were several rounds of very dull, very expensive correspondence. In the end, they agreed to a modification of the loan, reduced rate, restructured fees, effectively saving Philip close to $30,000 over the remaining term. They didn't admit wrongdoing. That's almost never how it works. But they made the problem go away, which told me everything I needed to know about what they were actually afraid of. Nora moved out in April. Philip filed for divorce in May. I'm not going to pretend that any of this felt like winning. Watching my son grieve a marriage, even a marriage built on deception, is not something I would wish on anyone. He was sad for a long time. He's still sad sometimes. That's allowed. You don't fall in love with a lie and just walk away clean. There's always some part of you that mourns the version of the story you thought you were living. But there's something else I want to say, because I think it matters. This past Thanksgiving, a different Thanksgiving, a year and a half after that dinner table comment that started all of this, Philip drove up to Charlottesville and we cooked together in my kitchen. Just the two of us. He made Leonard's stuffing recipe because I taught it to him years ago, and he still remembered every step. We ate at the same table where I'd spent so many years eating with his father, and we talked about Leonard, and we laughed at things we hadn't laughed about in a long time. After dinner, he was washing dishes at the sink, and he said, without looking at me, I keep thinking about how close it came. What would have happened if you hadn't been paying attention? I was always paying attention, I said. That's just what mothers do. He laughed. Then he was quiet for a moment. How did you know? He asked. Like, what was the actual moment? I thought about it. I thought about Nora's face at that Thanksgiving table, the wine glass, the smile. At your age, she underestimated me, I said. They almost always do. He dried his hands and hugged me from behind the way he did when he was a teenager and taller than me, suddenly, and didn't quite know what to do about it. Not me, he said. I never underestimated you. I'm 63 years old. I'm a widow. I live alone in the house where I raised my son and grew old with my husband and built a life I'm proud of. There are people in the world who will look at that sentence and see vulnerability. A woman alone, older, perhaps not as sharp as she used to be, perhaps in need of someone to help manage things. They're welcome to that assumption. It's the most useful thing I've ever had working in my favor. Follow my story until the end. And if this resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, or if you've ever had to protect someone you love by staying very quiet and very patient, drop your city in the comments. I read every single one. I've thought a lot about what made any of this possible. Not the legal outcome. That was just paperwork and patience. I mean, what made it possible for me to see clearly when someone I was supposed to trust was slowly building a wall between me and my own son. The honest answer is that I paid attention, not just at the end, when the evidence was already there. I mean, years before that, decades. I trained myself to watch what people do rather than what they say. Nora said she was helping. What she did was maneuver. Those are not the same thing, and the gap between them is where the truth lives. There's a version of this story where I don't catch it, where I let the comments about my age go by because I didn't want to seem difficult, where I hand over cosigner access to my accounts because it seemed like the reasonable, family-minded thing to do, where I slowly become a supporting character in my own financial life while someone else rewrites the ending. That version almost happened. It didn't because I refused to let being underestimated turn into being defeated. I think about Philip a lot when I reflect on all of this. He wasn't foolish, he was in love, and he trusted his wife, which is exactly what a person is supposed to do in a marriage. The people who take advantage of that trust are the ones who deserve our judgment, not the ones who gave it freely. He came back to himself. That took courage, the quiet kind that doesn't look dramatic from the outside but costs everything on the inside. When he sat across from Nora and said, "You lied to me," knowing what it meant for his marriage, knowing what came next, that was not a small thing. I'm proud of him for that, in a way I don't have the words for. What I keep returning to is this: the choices Nora made didn't just affect her. They unraveled a marriage she'd built. They cost her a house, a family, a future she'd apparently spent years engineering. Every corner she cut, every document she withheld, every conversation designed to make me feel less capable than I am, all of it circled back. Not because the universe punishes people in tidy, poetic ways, but because deception is exhausting to maintain, and the more elaborate it gets, the more fragile it becomes. One forensic accountant with 31 years of experience and nothing but time is all it takes to pull a single thread. I don't feel satisfaction about the way it ended. I feel something quieter than that, something closer to clarity. I know who I am. I know what I built. I know that my name is on my accounts and my house and my life, and that nobody gets to rewrite that story without going through me first. If you're older and someone is making you feel like your age is a liability, like your experience is an inconvenience, like your judgment can't be trusted, pay attention to that feeling, not with fear, with focus, because the thing they're underestimating is probably the most valuable thing you have. I'm 63 years old. I am not done.